fees, which should be really interesting. We've got Clare Nash and Tomas Millar joining us. So Clare is the founding director of Clare Nash Architects. Her practice became an early adopter of flexible home working, tiering of services, and choosing to publish their fee structures openly. Claire's going to talk to us about the pros and cons of publishing fee structures and why winning and losing work isn't always fee related. Tomas is a co-founder of Millar and Howard Workshop and has found considerable success in practice, winning awards and founding a business spin-off for custom build development. Tomas believes that if you're winning more than a third of work you're bidding for, you're not charging enough, and he will share his experience of introducing service level agreements and being specific about project deliverables. So hi Clare and Tomas, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. So I think, are you guys talking together, or you're talking one after the other, I think, aren't you? So
I think I'm going first.
Lovely. Of course.
Okay. Shall I get cracking?
Yes, please do, whenever you're ready.
So I set up 10 years ago in the midst of the recession as it was happening back then. And I had no idea what to charge, and I hadn't even really worked on extensions before because the previous practice I worked at did mostly public projects. So I was suffering from quite a few money mindset issues, like what to charge, what am I worth when I don't even really know what I'm doing, and all that sort of stuff. So that was tricky, and so of course I charged far too little, but I think that's quite common, especially as nobody ever talks about what you're supposed to charge. So it's a bit difficult when you're starting out to try and work out what you should be charging. And then I started. I did get extension projects. I just put postcards in local shops and things, and just got going. And then I read about marketing and niching. I went to networking events where there were marketing consultants talking about that kind of stuff, and I thought, okay, this is worth a try. Let's see what happens. So I chose barns as my niche in 2014 because my dad had converted barns when I was younger, and I was always quite interested in it. I like standing in the middle of the field. I'm really happy in the countryside, not so much in urban environments, so that seems a sensible choice. And I wrote my first blog about it because I got planning permission for a barn conversion. I wrote about that, did a whole case study, and then all of a sudden I had clients ringing me up saying, "Oh, you're the expert on barns, can you come and do my barn?" So I had a massive spike in work 3 months later. And it wasn't just barn related. I mean, that's the bit of the myth about niching. You think you're reducing the amount of work coming in, but actually specialising in one thing also brings in other stuff. And then I got too busy, so I just decided, right, I've got to get brave. So without really knowing what I was doing, I just doubled my fees, thinking, oh well, it's worth a try. And work definitely didn't go down; it went up. And then I redid my website the following year, and I thought, I'm going to start publishing my fees because I'm fed up about the first conversation being about how much is it going to cost. I just want to talk about the project, and anyway, being British, don't really like talking about fees. So I found that really beneficial because I knew, by the way, I only published guidelines. I didn't literally cover every kind of project. I just chose the projects that I wanted, so new build house, large extension, and barn, and I produced guidelines for those sizes and those particular project types, so that it was clear that's what it was for, and therefore it could vary if it was a different kind of project. But I found it really helpful because people stopped asking me about fees as the first question, which was great. Then when I went to actually write the fee proposals, I just looked at my website and went, okay, I've already said this, so this is roughly what I should be charging. So everything just got simpler. But I don't do that anymore. I mean, there are some packages we offer that are just that price, and sometimes they vary, but mostly they're that price. And that's just because we've moved into a different market now. So we're not worried about clients thinking that we're only going to cost 50p, which was a problem before. So we just moved into a higher bracket, which does feel a bit elitist, but it's what I've discovered is that when you get bigger, you can't make money on the smaller projects anymore. and there's 7 of us now, and it was just me, and then there was 3 of us for a while, and now we're 7, so it makes a big difference. But if I was doing it again, I would definitely publish fee guidelines again. I think it's really helpful to people, especially in the sort of 50, 100 grand extension market. And for the new market that we're in at the minute, cost isn't the highest priority, and particularly as we're aiming at environmentally minded clients. That's just a bigger factor. Plus, when you're writing fees by themselves, you're not putting it next to the value that you're offering. So it's really important that the client understands that the value you're offering before they look at the price. If it's the other way around, then you're making them look at that first, which isn't the right. You're not training the client to think about the right things first. There's a couple of things I was going to say. Yeah. Anyway, so money mindset is quite a thing that took me several years to get past. So part of the reason I didn't raise fees was because I felt greedy. I felt like, oh no, that means I always have to work with rich clients, which automatically means they're evil and they're going to come out and sue me, and which is just rubbish. Like, you get horrible people whether they're poor or rich, and you get really nice people whether they're poor or rich. And it's but if you have a values-based website, you're attracting the clients with the same values. On the whole, you should generally get on and attract the nice people that you want to work with. That's what we've discovered anyway. So to summarise what I've just said, I'd say work on your mindset money issues first. If you have any, if you're lucky you don't have any, great. You can make lots of money. It's much easier when you haven't got your own issues in the way. And work out your own fee guidelines. So I still do that. It's just I don't publish them anymore. And that really helps me. So I've got set percentages for certain types of projects, and then sort of separate clauses for, like, you know, when it's listed, it's extra. When it's this, it's a bit more, that kind of thing. And it just makes it so much easier, and it stops me discounting. So, because I'm like, okay, this type of project cost us this many hours before. So I don't want to discount, because I might as well just give the client a £2 check, which I definitely don't want to be doing. And niching shows extra value to clients, which allows you to charge more and feel more confident in doing so. So I'd really recommend that, and doing a bit of soul searching on what kind of projects you'd really like to work on, and then how to talk to those kind of clients and really focus on the benefits they're getting out of working with you, rather than, like, they're not that interested in a list of qualifications. They're interested in case studies and the benefits to them, that kind of stuff. And then my final extra tip is about marketing in general, which is that a lot of people dread it, because it seems like, oh God, I've got to post on social media 3 times a week, or I've got to write this blog, or I've got to turn up at networking events or run workshops or something. And you don't have to do any of those things. I've chosen blogging because I like writing, and that's pretty much my only strategy. And then I post on social media about once a month, which is extracted from blogs anyway. And you know, other architects are really great at photography or videography, or they like social media, or they like drawing. So if you choose something that you enjoy doing anyway, then you'll do it more. And the point is, the more you do it, the more benefit you'll get out of it. So you don't need to be everywhere and doing everything. Just choose one thing you like, and that's it. And now I think I'm going to hand over to Tom.
Great. Yeah, that was fascinating to hear as well. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. Yeah, so I'm going to sort of carry on and talk a bit about kind of communicating your added value to clients. And yeah, I think, as Claire was saying, I think it's really interesting that I think fees kind of pre Thatcher were kind of fixed, and so kind of charging what you charge as an architect was effectively like a science. because you just had a fixed fee, and really the kind of art was in the architecture. Whereas we're living in a much more kind of complex world now, where the fees themselves are part of the art. They're not just a kind of an absolute that you can go to some book, read up what the fee is, and then kind of charge that. You have to be creative with how you're charging your fees. So architects fee bidding today, I think we're all sort of working to the RIBA plan of works. We all have a website. Quite a lot of our websites are quite similar. They have kind of studio projects, news, contacts. They might have won an award, and they might have some blurb about being designer-led, working together with clients, sustainability, iterative process, etc. Now, one architect might charge 25,000, another 30,000, another 35. And so one of the things that I really kind of encourage people to do is quite often when we talk about fees, we talk about the number, we talk about the fee itself, whereas what I think we should really be talking about is value. And so really, I think one of the arts in setting fees is to try and shift the attention away from the fee itself and actually towards the deliverables on a project and what makes you different. So I have this thing that kind of I'm not sure if you know what all of these have in common, but they're all commodity projects, commodity objects. So they're all things which are the same. Like when you buy a barrel of oil, it's the same, and gold is just the same, whatever type of gold you buy. And the same could be true of kind of potatoes and milk. So they're all commodities, and services can also be a commodity. So like an estate agent's, you could argue they essentially kind of all offer the same service. And so there's a question of, have architects become a commodity service? Are we basically all providing the same service? And the only thing that really differentiates us then is our fee. And much as the kind of RIBA plan of works is great, and it's really fantastic for kind of helping kind of plan the project and explain to clients what stages you're at in the process, I think it also risks making us all kind of appear the same and similar. And the problem with this is that in a commodity market, you can only be as good as your dumbest competitor. So really the person who, in a commodity market, if you're presenting yourself as the same, then really it's the kind of person who charges the lowest fees who's going to win. So that's no good for anybody. So the trick with this is to differentiate. So I think it's really interesting thinking about smartphones with this. So the kind of iPhone came out in 2007, I think. And at the time the iPhone came out, this is what phones looked like. So there were lots of different styles, different approaches and things. And the problem, so the first way in order to sort of not be a commodity is to kind of innovate or show how you're different and try and differentiate. The problem is, as you differentiate, your competitors will tend to try and kind of copy the best product, and gradually there's this tendency for the innovations to then sort of become uniform and become a commodity in itself. So while the iPhone really stood out in 2007 and really differentiated itself, I'd argue that there's maybe not that much difference between an iPhone and many other phones nowadays. So how do we do this in a service? Well, it's interesting to look at other service providers. The AA is one I always like, and I really like this idea of segmenting your market and showing. And one of the things I really like about this is it shows you have different service levels and different deliverables. And what this is forcing you to do is look at the deliverables, not just the figure. So you're having to go down this list and see what you're getting for that figure. And so this is really kind of, I think, yeah, what Sam was talking about earlier today as well. And we've implemented this, and we've been doing it in our practice for about probably about 10 years now, and it's been really, it's revolutionised the way we charge our fees. So here you have this same situation again where the architects are bidding for work. One charges 25,000, one charges 35, but the one in the middle who's kind of charging different services is both the cheapest and the most expensive, depending on what they're offering. So in this way, again, you're really forcing the customer to look at your deliverables, not just the cost. And so we've developed a fee template that's very similar to the one Sam was talking about earlier. And I've actually I posted it in the comments, and hopefully someone else might post it repost it back in the comments now. A link to a Google Documents with our fee, the way we charge our fee as an example. To sort of show how we've set it up. But really, again, I'm repeating myself a bit, but really focusing on the deliverables and what differentiates you from your competitors. And so you end up, if you look at the percentages here, if someone says, what percentage do you charge? Well, it's a range from kind of maybe 6 or 7% to 20%, depending on what service level you have. And so this is something else I thought I'd show very quickly. This is something we've been developing where we've actually been starting to analyse our fees. So we use Harvest to collect our data for time, and we've started analysing that in a piece of software called Microsoft BI, which is a kind of helps you make graphs and things, and starting to look at our projects, which ones go over, which ones have made a bit of money, and using this to help us kind of identify which projects are kind of not going so well, and then start to have conversations about how to address that. So we still have a lot of projects that go over time, but I think this is a way of at least kind of starting to have a conversation in the practice about which ones do and why. And I think, I suppose, actually one of the overriding things I really wanted to get across in the talk today is like the way we charge our fees is really difficult to get right. And I think, again, Claire was saying how she's changed the way she charges over time. And we have too, and different techniques have worked in different life cycles of the practice. And also it can take time for things to kind of push through. So this was one image on the left here is one of our very first projects, which is a tree house we built. And so that was in 2003. And then I suppose it was almost like 10, I think it was actually maybe 12 years later that we did the tree house that was featured on Grand Designs. So this is it takes a while for those initial things you sort of set in place to then run kind of all the way through to completion. Yeah. And then that was the same. We did a wedding venue that won an RIBA award in 2012, I think it was. And we're only just now starting to get more wedding venues coming through. So it can take quite a lot of time from starting to set your niche to actually it becoming your niche. And it requires quite a lot of patience, I think. But as Claire was saying, if you focus on the things that you're really passionate about, then eventually that comes... eventually that pays off. Yeah, and so just a summary: compete on service and benefits you provide, not on the price. Differentiate your practice from your competitors. Segment your market with different service levels, and then aim to win 1 in 3 jobs you bid for. So really, if you're going out and bidding for jobs, you should be expecting to lose some of them because you are too expensive. And if there are 3 people bidding for each job, then you'd be expecting to win about 1 in 3. So be prepared to lose some jobs in order to charge the right fee. And yes, I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Tom. And Claire, thank you. That was really interesting. I've got a question to start off, Tom, and it's to do with your template, which you very kindly shared with us. I'm just really interested to know, do you use that one template for every scale of project, or do you have different templates for different project scales?
That's a really interesting question. I think what we've found is that it works. That particular setup works really well for domestic clients. But we find that when we're working with an organisation, or particularly maybe say a public project, they're probably always going to go for the lower end of the spectrum. And so in that situation, we tend to use things like we offer VR, and we tend to use that as a selling point, and we actually only provide one level of service. So I think that's a really good example where it's not appropriate for every project, and you have to be creative with the fees.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm in a process of trying to implement something similar following conversation. You came and talked to our group, didn't you, and showed us that. And it's quite complicated to get your head around, you know, the difference between your offering to a 75 grand extension and your offering to a £500,000 house, you know. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you very much. Julie has asked whether either of you charge for initial consultations. That's something that's had a bit of discussion lately as well.
I do. And that came out of COVID because there were so many people sitting at home and pondering what to do with their house, and we had so many inquiries. Well, we're still getting too many, really. But I just got fed up of going to so many of them and not getting anything out of it, because there was a really big gap during COVID between people. You know, basically this May, June, everybody signed up in the same 3 weeks from like a year ago and a day ago. That was kind of the big gap. So I just got sick of it, and so I was like, sod it, I'm going to just charge 150 quid plus that for every consultation. But for that they get they get planning advice and ballpark build costs, because that's often what they want to know. And to be honest, that helps us, because if I do the ballpark build cost first, then I know what to charge. So it's kind of work I'm already doing, but they might as well see it. So I just added made it look a bit prettier, and made it so that someone else could understand it, a layperson. But yeah, and they've been really popular. So that I've had about 2 people out of, I don't know, 100 who said don't want to pay that. And I'm like, great. Don't have to see you later. So it's been really positive, and then but we give it back to people who sign up for the full project.
Yeah, yes, I do something similar. Yeah. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting what Sam was talking about earlier today about doing that initial bit of work that they're charging for, and where they're really demonstrating that they're what they're providing is their expertise and their ideas. I think one of the things we found very early on is there's a really big misunderstanding of what architects do, and a lot of the smaller scale kind of projects, people think basically you're just coming up with the outside of the building and getting it ready for planning. And so I think there's a really big thing in kind of educating clients and demonstrating what else we can do, not assuming that clients know what that is. So we quite like to do a sort of small stage at the beginning, which is a relatively low fee, where we can really demonstrate the way we work, and we try and demonstrate some of the kind of virtual reality and things like that, and really kind of get it working, show our working methods, so they get to experience that for later on in the project. But yeah.
That's really interesting. So we've recently started, same experience as Claire. We just had an absolute influx of people wanting little extensions and wanting us to go and see them. And initially we went to all of them, and it turned out people didn't actually want to do it now. They wanted to do it in 3 years' time, and they just wanted some advice, and we were just never in the office. So we've started doing, we send out an initial inquiry form, and in that we clearly state there's going to be a charge for initial consultation, although we'll do a free virtual consultation. And it really has sorted the wheat from the chaff. People just don't fill the form out. So that's been really helpful as well. Sam has put in his charge into the, Sam Goss has put his charge into the chat, which is really interesting. And a lot of people saying they do a free virtual consultation. Adrian has interestingly said, do people limit the time for acceptance of a fee proposal? Do you have a time limit on your charges?
We don't, but we probably should. I mean, in practice, we have a couple of times, because actually jobs can also sometimes take quite a while to convert. So we have had it where someone's approached us, and it's been 2 years later that we actually get going on the project, by which time we have had to charge more. I always think when we're thinking about these things to try and think of another creative service that you might have that maybe you don't have much experience of. So I sometimes think about if I was wanting a suit made, what would I expect? I'd be really nervous about it because I don't know anything about that subject area, but I'd want something really good. And so you're thinking, what would I, as a client, what would I want to know and what would I expect? So if I went to get a quote for a suit being made, it's something I haven't ever done, if you went back a year later and sort of wanted to buy it, you'd expect the quote to have changed. Yeah, it's always quite good to think about it from another industry's point of view.
Yeah, I think there isn't a time limit on it, but I don't think there needs to be, because you haven't signed an agreement with anybody at that point. It's just, this is what my fee is today, and if you come back in a year's time, it'd probably be more. That's sort of how I think about it, and then it's totally up to me whether I want to charge more or not, depending on whether I got it right in the first place.
Yeah, I think
what's changed.
I think we have a standard clause that says something like 90 days, and we reserve the right to review the fee. And that's about it, really. But a lot of the time it comes in after 90 days, and I don't. So there you are. Kerry has asked. Oh, sorry, Claire.
I was just going to say, the thing is, it's kind of onus on the client anyway, because if they want to work with you and your fee's gone up, then it's kind of, they take it or leave it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
If they've hung around for a year, what do they expect? I mean, most reasonable people would expect the fee to change in that time, I think. And maybe that's the definition then of a reasonable client, which is quite handy to do.
It is. Yeah. Kerry's asked whether you follow up on your fee proposals via phone or email.
All I do is I have a newsletter which goes out about once a month, which is, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a newsletter. It's like an insight. So I'll write about something that's interesting and would be useful for clients at that time, and that acts as a prompt. So if they were thinking that, like, they can't forget that we exist, so if they want to get back in touch, then I often find after the newsletter there's a little flurry of oh, I haven't forgotten about you, or something, and I'm still interested, I'm just doing XYZ, or there are just project sign-ups. But I don't find it helpful to chase people up. I think we've laid it all out already. It's there if they want it. If they've got questions, they know we're really approachable. So I just leave it. I've got, for me, it feels like a waste of time chasing when I've got other stuff coming in where people want to get on with it straight away.
I think it's really interesting thinking about. I mean, I've read a couple of books. Got quite into business self-help books a few years ago, and there was a really good one. I think it's called "To Sell Is Human" or something like that. I think it's Daniel Pinkman or Daniel Pink, but he really sort of talking about lots of kind of sales techniques, and from everything I've heard, doing the follow-up is a really good thing to do to try and win work if it's something that you really want. When we're sort of a little bit low on work, we really will sort of make those phone calls. And again, if you think of another industry, I'm currently doing an extension on my house and I've got a quote for some windows, and it seems like quite a lot, and I haven't ordered it yet, but they keep on sending me an email every couple of weeks and I'm not actually responding to it, but it is sinking in. And so even though I'm not responding to their emails, I know I am going to at some point when I've got my head around the fact that I'm going to have to spend that money on the windows. So actually keeping the client sort of thinking about you and your project. I mean, the other thing we follow up is asking if they've got any questions or if there was anything about the fee that they found confusing or were surprised about. And you can then learn a lot for future projects. Also, actually, when someone doesn't want to go with your services, asking them why not. And, sometimes people might say, we really wanted to use you, but you were too expensive and we just don't have that money. other points, yeah, you get all sorts of answers, but it's really useful for learning about how to change the way you work. And I think, again, that's where setting the fees is a real art, I think, and we've by no means got it right. And we're constantly kind of tweaking the way we do it to try and get it better and better, and also experimenting with the fee levels, so gradually pushing the fees up and waiting until lots of people aren't then going with our service and then edging them down again, and by doing that you get to kind of work out roughly where you are. And actually, when we started providing the VR, suddenly we were winning lots more of the work that we were bidding for, because we were kind of innovating, and you don't have to do that with technology. It might be around your expertise with listed buildings or something like that. But again, as Claire was saying, finding the thing that really makes you you and the thing that you love, and using that to differentiate from the others.
That's really interesting, and that leads into the next question that's been asked, is about architects are notoriously bad for expressing our value, I think, and we undermine ourselves constantly all the time. So how do you think, especially for sole practitioners, maybe if they've just come out of a practice and they're now going it alone, they might lack a bit of confidence. Have you got any tips for how we can be amazing as we know we are?
You go for that one first, but Thomas.
I think this is. I had a big conversation with someone at the Bristol meetup of Guerrilla Tactics about this, and I think how we sell our value is really, really complicated. I actually think we're tempted to go back to design when we talk about our value and talk about the value of design, which it would be great to be able to express that as clearly as possible. The thing that I've sometimes found easier is to sell the value of risk, say. So you can say, well, you could do this yourself, and you don't strictly need an architect to do the kind of after planning work, but the risks are huge. And having a qualified architect who's doing this work day in, day out kind of helps reduce that risk. And so I think sometimes with the value we tend to go to the design, which I'd like to go to, but the thing that perhaps sometimes sells more are the things peripheral to the design, more around risk and certainty and things like that. But again, it's an exceptionally difficult thing to do, I think. I'm not sure if anyone else has had any success with that.
I think we forget sometimes how much impact we have on clients' lives. I mean, what we're offering is completely transformational. So I tend to write case studies and go and visit finished projects, and then soak up all the love that comes from the client in those situations. And sometimes they write us testimonials, and I say, can you put that on Google, because that boosts the boosts the rankings. Like, literally paste it. Thank you very much, client. And I write them down and put them, like, if I'm having a rubbish day, I've got a little book of nice things that reminds me of the stuff that we do. Because I mean, particularly last year I had a really challenging year. Various things just knocked me sideways, and that book was so valuable. And I seriously wondered about quitting at one point, and it just seems like such a waste. You can get into that sort of dark hole of, oh, I'm not good enough, or what's the point, and can I find something else easier to do? Like, why don't I just become a marketing consultant or something? That looks easier. but in the end, you have to keep reminding yourself about all the good stuff that you've done and the transformation that you've had, and then that makes you feel much more confident about, this is what I'm charging, because this is what you're getting, Mr. and Mrs. Client. It's like totally life-changing, and they can't do it without you, not to that level anyway.
Yeah,
it's interesting. One of the best things that we ever did, that was by far, it's got us by far the most work. So we've kind of won awards, we've been on grand designs, but this thing that I'm about to tell you knocked all of those out the water by a factor of 10. Was we had an exhibition in a cafe, just a local cafe, put a few pictures of our work up, put a little card on the table saying we'll be sitting in the cafe on Tuesday mornings, come and have a chat. And we got about 3 years work for doing that. And
Wow.
it's amazing because for the cafe, they're used to just having some local artists' paintings on the wall who might be selling their paintings for £100 or so. But for us, it was just enormously valuable. And so again, it's interesting thinking about where you can find your clients, and rather than kind of focusing on the architectural kind of publications or kind of mass media, actually just going hyper local, and that, yeah, that's been by far our biggest marketing success. Just a little tip.
It's really interesting. One of the questions coming from Kerry, and actually she's part of our RIBA East group, and it's something we've been talking about a lot, is about with very, very small projects where fees are obviously very tight, the competition is rife for, you know, us versus any other architectural designer out there. How do we incorporate the costs of all the, I don't mean new, but all the sustainability elements that we want to do, the embodied carbon calculators, all of that kind of thing? How, I mean, Thomas, there's nothing, I don't think, currently in your fee structure. Is that just because you do that stuff as standard and it's just included, or is that something that you're going to be adding as a separate item? Or how do you think?
I think you've caught me out there. But I think
I wasn't trying to.
I mean, it's something that we provide, but like thinking about it, that should totally be a separate item, because again, the more I always encourage people to sort of like put as many things in that list as possible, because it doesn't matter if then your services end up covering 80 pages, because when compared to, I'm seeing quite a few comments about architectural designers and people who aren't qualified and project managers, they won't be providing all those services. And so the more that you can show that you're doing all those things. So after this, I'm going to go and add those things onto the list. But again, these things evolve, and so it's getting feedback like that. That's really helpful.
Well, they do, because, you know, from the discussions we've had, we all want to include them as standard. We just want to do them. It doesn't want to be an optional extra, essentially. But I suppose pointing out to the client that we are going to do it helps set us apart from the competition, I suppose. Okay, let me just have a little look.
I think someone was asking what contract value associated with. I'm not totally sure, to be honest, but as a rough thing, I think the basic ends up at about 6% and the premium ends up somewhere around 20%. So you should be able to deduce it from that.
Figure it out. Get the calculators out. Yeah. Okay, we've had quite a few. Oh yeah, contract. So I'm sorry, bear with me. A load came in while we were talking then. It's a flurry. So
we tend to use the standard, the RIBA contracts, the services contract. There's a question here. People are asking for a poll on that, aren't they? But I mean, we find the domestic services contract great, and that's the one we used.
Oh, that's handy. Okay, I think. Oh, hang on, they're still coming in. What contract value? So actually, here's one for you, Thomas, from the discussion we had with Sam earlier, where he mentioned about not putting a fee against stage 4 onwards. Where do you come to? Well, actually, both of you as well, Claire, because I'm guessing with barn conversions, there's probably quite a lot of unknowns, are there, in the early days?
So we're, as an office, we're really split on this, because I think, and we've had quite a lot of conversations just in the last few weeks, I feel like I quite want to give a client the overall cost, but then half the office then think that we should just provide a cost to planning, and then have it as a kind of to be confirmed for the stage 4. And so what we're doing actually is we're doing A/B testing on that at the moment. So we're practicing both strategies. We're recording how they work and then getting feedback from the clients on which one, on that. So again, we're constantly running little tests like that to try and work out how to make it better.
We've always shown fees all the way through. The only time I don't is we do quite a lot of pre-apps where we're just testing policy, and that's a package by itself. And so then I'll just say you need this, and then if it's a project, then I'll do the whole thing for you. We've always done that, and I think that's part of the whole eco stuff, because that's although we're always thinking about it in the design stage, the majority of the work is in the technical stage. But and in the very rare times where I haven't done it all the way, through, the client said, "Oh, but what about the rest of it?" They just want to know the total cost, so they can budget for it, and then it's a fair comparison with others. And because our we don't use the RIBA plan of work. We use the domestic contract, but not the actual plan of work, because we've got our own stages which absolutely relate to those, but they're called different things to explain it a bit better to the client, and also for our own thing. So they know what we're invoicing for each time, and then nobody ever says, "Oh, what's this bit for?" We're like, "Well, here it is." Nobody says that anymore. So that's helpful. I can't remember what I was going to say now.
Claire, do you offer a tiered services, or do you kind of have a standard offering and then different options?
I personally and the rest of the team really dislike not using a 3D model. It just makes it harder for us. So if they want that, then they can just go somewhere else. I've made yeah.
So refreshing, Claire. I love it.
I think it's really good. I think it's really good that you just know that what you provide and are confident in that and are willing to lose clients for it. And I think that's something when you start out, it's really difficult to have that confidence. But I think the sooner that you can begin to develop that, I think the better, because it means you end up doing the work that you like, and getting paid well for it, which is kind of
It's very empowering, isn't it? Or seems to be very empowering.
Yeah,
and it's difficult and it takes time to develop, but I think it's good.
I find clients are quite receptive to it, because the automatic assumption is that 2D is easier, and when I explain to them that actually for us it's massively not, and there are loads of error-saving things that we get out of the 3D model which makes it easier for us. So then they see it's not a cost saving, and then they're like, "Oh, okay." they just get it. I mean, honestly, it would take us longer to do the 2D stuff. I really think that. And anyway, I'd hate it, but all of us would. Now we got used to doing it like that. I know lots of people still do 2D drawings. I regularly have conversations with other architects about that. But we really love the 3D.
That's really interesting. Someone's asked in the questions, Claire, you mentioned about offering build cost advice when you go and see your clients. Is that based on your own previous examples, or do you work with quantity surveyors to kind of get accurate figures?
Quantity surveys just take too long and are too detailed at that stage. You just need a very broad brush approach, and that's also I think it's harder to do that at the very small end of the scale, because £5 can make a massive difference on a 20 grand project or a 30 grand project, but at the bigger end of the scale it's not really a big deal. But you need to start somewhere, and I have loads of caveats on it. Like, this is basically project cost, but also the home building and renovating magazine does a really good review of all the projects that they've ever had in their magazines and how much they actually cost. It's really helpful, and it tallies up, and it's split by region, and it tallies up very much with our personal experience. So I feel quite confident in those ballpark. But there's a massive COVID caveat at the moment, of course.
Oh, yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. How are you finding advising people who are coming to you now, who are going to be on site in a year's time? How on earth do you begin to advise them on what construction costs are going to be?
Well, you just say, this is what it usually costs. COVID's causing all sorts of bother at the moment. You have to negotiate that with the builder when the time comes. And I used to take on all this kind of responsibility myself, but it's impossible, and you can't. So you have to dump it all on the client. And I know it's like, oh, poor domestic client doesn't know what they're doing kind of thing. But in the end, they're the ones getting the massive benefit at the end. And when you're not dealing with the really smaller scale ones, it's a risk they can afford to take and that they want to take. And as long as you make it really clear, this is the risk, it's up to you, then, they can take it or leave it. We don't have to soak up all of that responsibility.
Yes, I think that's really interesting. That I think again, when we started out, we started out building what we designed, and so we kind of did absolutely everything. And then when we started just doing the design work, we were then doing the cost estimating and kind of almost trying to do the M&E stuff as well. And and feeling like we had to save the client as much money as possible and keep fees as low. And I think the more we go on, the more we backed away from some of those other things. So now actually we're slightly different to Claire. We provide very little cost advice, and just at a very early stage just say if you want cost advice, there are professionals who can help that with a QS, and that's up to the client whether they take that on. And we say, you know, if you don't have a QS, we're not going to be providing any more cost advice. And the same with M&E actually as well. We don't even really leave it as a choice. We say unless you have an M&E designer, the M&E isn't going to be designed. You know, which is kind of, whereas in the past we've been tempted to say, well, we could probably do a basic NBS spec for that. And I think clients seem to kind of, they understand it as long as we're clear. I think the clients kind of take that on board. Yeah,
I think that is the point, isn't it? As long as everyone knows where they stand, no one really has any room for argument, do they?
Yeah, and I found since we've been much more explicit about what we are and aren't providing, we've had far less disputes about fee. We used to sort of have quite a lot actually of people say, well, I don't think you've reached the end of that stage, or you need to, I don't feel like you've completed stage 2 yet. But since we've started listing the deliverables, we have very, very few of those conversations now, which is good, which is a good thing.
Great. So I think we've got time for one last question before moving on to the next session. This one is from Tommy to you, Claire. How do you deal with 3D modelling where works involve existing properties? Presumably, how accurately do you model a wonky old barn? I'm guessing is the question. Yeah.
Well, I just take the view like we work on grade 2 listed buildings, so it's not like we have to measure all the corner sinkings, and if that is the case, then we get the surveyors with the point cloud thing, and they do that bit. And then we still use a 3D model, but we take an average. We accept the building's wonky, but for our purposes, we need to make it a bit straighter. And because it's staying where it is, it sort of doesn't matter. Whereas it's very critical when you're building the new bit. You have to get the measurement, totally right and everything. But if it's staying there and you're just saying add this much insulation, secondary glaze, everything, or whatever, then it's not, the measurements aren't so critical. But it means that we can visualize everything so much better, and we're not trying to line up elevations with plans all the time. All that annoying.
Oh yeah.
We discovered this amazing thing about 6 years ago, which I have given a previous talk about, which might be available somewhere on the RIBA website, but it's called photogrammetry, where you take about 300 photos of the existing building and then you feed it into this bit of software called Metashape, and it then generates a really kind of accurate to like 10 million point 3D model of the building. And so we've been using that to sort of scan in basically listed buildings and things, and then you can put your model onto that and visualize what it looks like, and it is totally been transformative. I think Metashape might be about £200 or something like that.
Wow, that's not a lot for what you get.
And the other thing we do is nearly every project we do that at the first meeting, and we process this model and then we show it back to the client when we give the fee proposal. And it's a really, takes a little bit of time to get your head around it, but it's really valuable tool once you've done it.
Great. Yeah, my colleague Jane has been using something similar. I don't know exactly what the name is, but we've been testing it on surveys because it's really helpful. Because there's always one photo you wish you'd taken, and that eliminates that problem. And it's really helpful when you've got other people working on projects who maybe weren't there at the survey. We try and get everyone there, but we can't always see. And then, they can see the whole thing.
Yeah, actually, someone's just pointing out that the new iPhone's got LiDAR scanning on it, which I switched away from the iPhone, and it's making me want to switch back.
Absolutely.